So today is part 21 of our journey through Paul's letter to the Colossians. If you're joining us for the very first time, we employ a style of preaching known as expository. That's where you go verse by verse, chapter by chapter, through a text of the Bible. And so if you're more familiar with a standard topical sermon, we don't really do that, but fret not, because when you're going verse by verse, chapter by chapter, you eventually cover pretty much every single topic in the Bible while maintaining the author's intended meaning and actually providing an extra degree of accountability to the pastor, even if he were to say inadvertently, accidentally take a verse out of context. And so here's what you need to know. Paul is writing this letter during his first Roman imprisonment. I say his first. He had a second one. His first imprisonment operated sort of like a house arrest situation. He had some degree of liberty allotted to him, and it's believed that the pastor in Colossae, a man named Epaphras, he's mentioned multiple times, that he travels nearly 1,000 miles from he travels 1,000 miles from Colossae in modern-day Turkey to visit Paul in prison and brief him on the situation going on in Colossae. And in response, Paul writes this letter. It's very preventative in nature, dealing very much with the false teaching that is happening and occurring there. And so Colossians, along with Ephesians, Philippians, and Philemon, Colossians, Ephesians, Philippians, and Philemon, those four, they make up what's known as the prison epistles that were written during this time. Colossians is probably the most Christocentric. Out of all Paul's letters, it's probably the most Christocentric letter that he ever pens. In other words, it's all about Christ, and you see Christ just on every page, including today. And so, without further ado, part 21, chapter 3, verse 20. Let's grip it and rip it. So it says, "Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord." After addressing the wives and the husbands, Paul now turns his attention to the children. He says, "Children, obey your parents in everything." In other words, not some things, not the things you agree with, but obey them with everything. And when he says this, he doesn't mean that children ought to obey after they've been asked 2 or 3 or 4 different times, but rather the goal of obedience should be after the initial request, after the first request to obey. And parents understand that children must learn this. They must learn to do this before they can even read the Bible, let alone this verse. And that's because children will not do this automatically. I mean, it'd be great if they did. They don't. Children do not obey instinctively, which is why parents must require obedience from their children for the good of the children. But unfortunately, some parents think that this is impossible, or they think this is unattainable. And as a result, many parents will get discouraged because they feel as if they're just herding cats. And they end up sort of just giving up this fight. And my guess is you've probably seen this at one point or another, or quite possibly you've done this. Parents will make a request, and they'll say something to the effect of, "Hey, you need to turn that down, that's too loud." And then what does the kid do? They ignore the parents. And then the parents say a second time, "Hey, turn that down." Ignore it. And then the third time, "Hey, turn that down." And kind of raise your voice a little, and then they turn it down. And so what happens in that situation is that the children learn what your breaking point is. Because you've just taught them that I don't really have to do anything until they count to 3 or until they raise their voice. And in the process, so many parents confuse parenting with baseball. Let me be clear. Parenting's not baseball. It's not 3 strikes and you're out. Like whoever came up with the idea of counting as an obedience strategy, they came up with a really, really bad idea. Because when you do that, you're actually teaching your kids that they can ignore the first 2 requests that you make before they actually have to listen. And so they learn by you counting, they can wait until your voice is raised or until you've asked the 3rd time to actually obey when you do this. And when you do this, what you're actually doing, you're teaching them what obedience looks like. And if I'm being honest, I'm learning this right now, alongside of all of us today. I'm learning this with my 2.5-year-old little girl. And I've seen this. Mom asks her to do something, and at times, I'm in my office, and I'm like, what's going on? You kind of hear a conversation in the other room, and sometimes I have to just pause what I'm doing, pause working on this sermon, full stop. I have to interrupt, get up, walk out of my office. I say, sweetie, did you hear what Mommy said? Did you hear? Because maybe she did. I mean, she's 2, right? So I remind her, I'm like, hey, Mommy asked you to do something. You need to obey her, okay? But of course, if they haven't heard you, if they have heard you, well, that's a whole other issue. And yes, of course, there's a difference between a 2-year-old and 12-year-old in a situation like this. But if you have heard, because maybe they didn't, what do? I think you just say, hey, you need to go to your room right now. So that as the parent, as the future parent, you can begin to process what's happening, carefully think through the next course of action so you don't overreact, so you don't act in anger. And that's because the child knows. And the child learns along the way. They learn, my parents are really lazy. They won't do anything. So I can get away with it. To be clear, when you're counting, you're not teaching the child to obey. You're teaching them to negotiate. And I literally remember, I was in Sam's Club a month, 2 months ago, and I hear a parent say to the little child, I'm going to count to 10. And I'm like, 10? When did we start counting to 10? What happened to 3? Like, are we playing hide and go seek or are we parenting? But that's what she said. She said, I'm going to count to 10. And see, what we have today, we have these kind of gentle parenting strategies in which the parents, in some situations, they're actually attempting to get verbal permission from their child, or even worse, the parents will attempt to bribe their child into compliance. And I've got a friend of mine, I remember he came to visit me a couple years ago, and his parenting style is a combination of both counting and bribery. So if the poop hits the fan, as we say in the Army, or a slight variation of that, my friend goes straight for the bribery. He goes straight for the ice cream. It's ice cream. Anytime he gets in a jam, okay, well, just do this and Mommy will give you ice cream, right? Just promise the kids ice cream. And what's even worse, when it comes to requiring obedience of them, the wife will often just do this exponentially. And I remember we were in the mall at Papagayo's. You guys been to Papagayo's? Okay, some of you guys need to get saved. Great Mexican restaurant, great restaurant. That's not in my notes, but it is really good. We're there, we're sitting down, and the wife says to the husband, if we want to enjoy our dinner, you need to go back out in the mall and buy the child the toy that he wants. Because the child was having a meltdown. And I remember thinking, is this really happening? Like, call me old-fashioned. But I've always thought that my parenting strategy would be something similar to the George W. Bush strategy. You remember George W. Bush's famous line? We don't negotiate with terrorists. That's kind of my approach to parenting, right? That's my parenting goal. We don't negotiate with terrorists. And so the problem with this bribery strategy, it doesn't teach the child to obey. It teaches them to be an attorney. So when you say, Jimmy, it's time for bed, and Jimmy says, what do I get if I go to bed? The truth is they've learned that. They've learned that. They've learned because you gave up in this Colossians 3:20 instruction. So rewind. When Jimmy asked the question, well, what do I do, Daddy, if I get to go to bed? I think the answer is, Jimmy, you get to live. That's what you get. You get to live, right? Or sometimes the child, they've figured out they can actually get the parents to obey them. And usually this is in public where there are witnesses. And so the child will try to embarrass or shame the parents. So there's little Jimmy, and then he's down here like this, and he's just on the floor. No! No! And you would think that they're being tortured in that moment, right? And then the mom's like, it's okay, I'll get the toy, just put it in the cart, just stop, right? And it's just this hostage situation. Some of you guys have seen that kid. Some of you guys were that kid. Or some of you guys know who that kid is, right? And so mom says, fine, get the toy, whatever, just stop making a scene. And that, folks, when that happens, well, that really is the origin story for just about every villain in both the DC and Marvel universe. It is. That's it. Parents must require obedience of their children. And yeah, that does take time and it does take attention. And it might require you at times, parents, future parents, it might require you being 10 minutes late because you had to deal with a situation. But I think if Paul was here, I think he'd say, deal with it. I think he'd say, be 10 minutes late. You know what? Take an extra 5. Be 15 minutes late just to make sure. Which, oh, by the way, that usually is one of my pet peeves, being late. But now that I have kids, I understand a lot better. So if you have to be late for the sake of Colossians 3:20, you go ahead and do that. But woe to the person who is late and does not have any kids. Because I'm sitting here, I'm like, how did the Hesters get here on time with their 3 kids and you're still late and you're coming from the dorm? No, don't be that person, okay? Like, take the time to teach your children. Take the time to put the work in because it doesn't happen automatically. And I was listening to Jordan Peterson the other day, and Peterson's got some really, I think, very helpful things on parenting. And one of the things that he said that just really stuck with me is, parents, you need to raise your children in such a way that adults like to have them around. Like, nothing's worse than having a child at an event in which everyone there is wishing that child wasn't there because they're so obnoxious and so unruly. Like, nothing's worse than the child who takes the entire room of adults hostage. And some of you guys know what I'm talking about because you've been in that situation where everyone's just like, oh, God, please, God, let the parents come. Let the parents come. The problem is, in that situation, is they don't because they can't, because they've never taken the time. They've never put the work in. They've never required obedience of the child or the children. And to be clear, it doesn't happen automatically. Like, I promise you, the Pittman girls are not genetically engineered Homo sapiens from the WHO, but rather their parents put the work in. They put the work in. They put the effort in. They continue to put the time and the work in. And people forget that because I think as Americans, we're just so consumed with other things. And I'll tell you right now, that's a tragedy. It's a tragedy to be so consumed with other things, to prioritize other things over requiring obedience of your children. It's a tragedy when your child doesn't get invited to things because people don't want them around. Because you never put the time and effort in to do Colossians 3:20 with them. It's a tragedy when other people cringe when your child is around and they don't want to have anything to do with them. And so he says, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. The second reason children are to obey in everything is because there is a Lord. And he is pleased when you obey your parents. Like there is a God in heaven. And he is by rank over your parents. The reason children should obey the parents is not because it pleases the parents first and foremost, but because Colossians 3:20 says it pleases the Lord. That's the primary reason and motivation for the obedience of our children. In other words, we don't do things in the family because we made it up, but rather we do things because there is a God in heaven, and he's given us his word and told us how to live. To be clear, your parents are not God, but rather your parents submit to God. And that's the part of the verse that's key, because that means when I obey my parents, I'm not obeying my parents simply because they're my parents. I'm not obeying my parents because, they use that ancient creed because I said so. But rather, the ultimate reason I'm to obey them is because it's pleasing to God. And if it's pleasing to God, well, then the inverse must be true. It displeases God when you don't obey them. It displeases God when you're disrespectful to your mother or your father or your siblings. Because in those moments, God, He's not happy with you. And to be clear, when Paul gives this verse in Colossians 3:20, he doesn't say, obey your parents in everything so long as you agree with them. Like, he could have said that. He totally could have. He doesn't, which means your obedience to your parents is not predicated on whether or not you agree. And as a son, growing up with my mom, there were lots of times I did not agree. And I'm telling you, young people, there will be times that you don't agree, that you think your parents made a bad call. And here's the good news. You're allowed to feel that way. You're allowed to feel and believe that they made a bad call, but you're not allowed to take matters into your own hands. You're not allowed to be disrespectful and disobedient. And you might say, but Joe, they really did get the call wrong. Totally got the ruling on the field wrong. And my response would be, I'm sure they did. I'm sure they have. And I'm sure they will in the future. Not on purpose, but because they're your parents. They're not God. Of course they've made bad calls that you disagreed with. Like every referee and umpire has made a bad call at some point in their career. To be clear, your motivation to obey them is not predicated on them getting every call perfectly right. It's not predicated on you agreeing with them on every call, but rather your obedience is predicated on the fact that there is a real God in heaven who has given your parents to you, and it pleases him when you obey them. So to clarify, you can feel like they didn't get the call right. Just make sure you maintain the proper level of respect. And gentlemen, I'll tell you right now, because some of you guys need to hear this. If you want to get married, no girl is going to want to marry you when you are disobedient and disrespectful to your parents, because in her mind, that creates massive amounts of distrust. Because in the back of her mind, she's thinking, well, what happens if he disagrees with me? Is that how he's going to respond to me if he's angry, if he's upset? No girl's going to want to marry you. None. I'm telling you, not going to happen. If she witnesses your disobedience and your disrespect to your parents, especially, I think, to your mother, because if she does, it's just going to create all this insecurity and distrust towards you. You do not want to create distrust in your future wife and the relationship you have with her before you even get married. You do not want to do that. You don't have to agree with the call, but you gotta maintain your bearings. You have to obey, and you got to maintain a certain level of respect, because God has positioned your parents in authority over their children. And so I'll tell you, if you're fortunate enough to have Christian parents, man, you ought to give thanks to God, because you are unbelievably lucky. Like I would have given anything to have grown up with two Christian parents. And some of you guys take that for granted. You do. And I'll tell you right now, if you were blessed to have two Christian parents who love the Lord, you're in the minority right now. You are in the minority in this room. You're in the minority of people listening online. You are so blessed. And my guess is your level of gratitude and respect for both parents is not what it should be. Like some of you guys, after this sermon, you should probably go have a conversation with your parents and apologize to them for, at the very least, not showing them the proper respect and appreciation and for taking them for granted. Especially if you had two parents who are Christians and who are believers. Like, take it from someone whose dad is not a Christian. You don't know how fortunate you are. You don't. And all the stats will back me up on this. Like, if you're here and you're a Christian, it is overwhelmingly due to the influence and the discipleship of your family, specifically your mom and your dad. And the stats, they all say the same thing. I'll give you a breakdown. Like, the odds of a child becoming a Christian without any Christian parents is somewhere between 3 to 5%. So if you're in here and none of your parents are Christians, that's a miracle. You have a 3 to 5% chance. And if you're like me and only your mom is a believer, your odds of becoming a Christian is between 15 to 30%. Also a miracle. And if dad is the only one in the home, the odds of becoming a Christian jump to 55 to 70%. If it's only dad. Remember, mom, 15 to 30. Only dad, 55 to 70. And if you're blessed with parents loving God, both parents loving God, raising you in the discipline and instruction of the Lord, the odds of you becoming a Christian jump between 70 and 90%, which I think is amazing to me, because that's the baseline. 70 and 90%, that's the baseline. It's the same ceiling for only dads being believers. Bottom line is this: some of you guys have no idea how blessed you are. And some of you need to realize that today. Because I've spent the better part of 39 years on this planet crying and begging the Lord to save my father. Like, some of you guys should probably wake up and remember that obedience is ultimately rooted in pleasing God. Your obedience to your parents is ultimately about pleasing God. And so the question I regularly get on this topic is this. Is there a difference? Because how many of you guys are college age, so you're in a weird stage of life. Is there a difference between the Colossians 3:20 command to obey and the other command in the Bible to honor our father and mother that we find in the Ten Commandments? My short answer, yes, I think there is a difference. In the Ten Commandments, we're told to honor our parents. In Colossians 3:20, we're told to obey them. And what you have to understand is the command to honor them is for the totality of your lives. The command to obey them, Colossians 3:20, is not for the totality of your life. And so we obey our parents in everything during our younger years. Well, on the other hand, honoring your parents, the fifth commandment, Exodus 20:12, that's something that we're to do for our entire lives. I'll illustrate with an example. My friend called me up. He recently took his little boy to go get a haircut, and they're settling up the tab, and his son asked him to get some product. He's like, I need some product, Dad. I need product, right? Unless you were born with great hair like Andrew Glover, you need product. Okay? He's got great hair. I also can say that, right? And so while they're there, there's also this other mom with her son, and he's getting a haircut, and he said, Joe, I could overhear him telling his mom that he needs product too, just like my little boy. And she's like, no, you don't, you're fine. And they get into this very heated argument, and the mom literally says to him at one point, I'm your mother, you just need to obey me. I said, we're leaving, you're not getting any product, get in the car. And we're like, okay, Colossians 3:20, the son needs to obey, mom's got a point. At which point my friend telling me the story throws me a curveball and explains to me that the mom's son in this story was not 9 years old like his, but rather probably around 29 or 30. And the mom is, for some reason, his ride, taking him to get his hair cut when he's 30 years of age. And if I had to guess, he probably still lives at home in her basement where he plays video games, isn't married, doesn't have a job, or if he does, he only works part-time because full-time job stresses him out too much. Just a hunch. The mom literally says, you need to obey your mother to her 30-year-old son. Like, that's great when you're 3, not when you're 30. You need to honor your parents forever? But Colossians 3:20, I believe, is in effect when you are a child, when you are in your younger years, and or while you are still living in your parents' home to a certain extent. And someone might say, okay, Joe, I'd just like to point out, Joe, there's no caveat there. Where do you get this idea that Colossians 3:20 only applies while you're a child and or living at home? And my answer would be, number one, I base it in Genesis chapter 2, the leave and cleave passage. That, and practically speaking, like, how is this supposed to work, Colossians 3:20, when you're an adult? Like when you're married and you have your own family. Like if I'm wrong and Colossians 3:20 is for the totality of your life, how does that even work? Because I don't have a clue, practically speaking. And the second thing I'd point out is this. It says children to do this, Colossians 3:20. Not adults. It says children. And in the Greek, it doesn't make a determination of age. That's true. But in the first century culture, you'd probably be living at home until you got married and or moved away. And I think that's probably the clearest and most helpful idea of getting to the meaning behind the verse when it comes to how long I'm actually supposed to do this for. And the other thing I'd point out is the verse says, obey your parents. Not just any adults. It says your parents. And the truth is, there are adults in which mom and dad may give deferred authority, like a coach or a teacher. But this isn't all adults. This doesn't apply to all adults. Because some adults can be straight up, flag-waving, blue-haired, Marxist-loving bananas. Okay? Like some adults are just mean and wicked and evil. So yeah, Colossians 3:20 doesn't apply to every adult. It applies to your parents and a few others that your parents may give deferred authority to. And more to this point, the text says parents. It doesn't say mom and it doesn't say dad. It says parents. And this is also equally important to understand because what happens sometimes is the kids at some point will figure this out. I mean, kids are smart. They'll be like, I'll obey mom, or you know what? all obey dad. Now, usually it's all obey dad, but not mom. And the kids soon realize one of you is the good guy, one of you is the bad guy. One of you is the cop, one of you is kind of like the clown. And if they want something, they go ask the good guy. They ask the clown. And if they want to tattle, they go tell the cop. A moral of the story, parents need to speak with a unified voice in order to train their children to do Colossians 3:20. Now, I mentioned this in, I think, the previous week's sermon or a couple weeks ago, the importance about husbands loving your wives. I think one of the best ways practically you can love her is by having her back. Because odds are, if there are violations of Colossians 3:20, it's probably going to be more so with mom than it is with dad. Because by nature, there is something intrinsic with dads, usually, not always, but usually, that they just seem to engineer obedience a little bit better. And so I think this unified voice is really, really important because kids are super smart. They are. Like if you haven't had a conversation with the Pittman girls, you'll realize it really quickly. They're very, very intelligent. And I remember Jordan Peterson, he told a story one time. It was such a great story. He said his little boy on one occasion was acting up, misbehaving. And he said, "You're going to sit here on the steps until you obey." And his little boy said, "Good, I want to sit on the steps." And Peterson remarked, he's like, that was a pretty good comeback. And then he paused, and he smiled, and he said, "You might want to sit on the steps, but you're not going to want to sit on the steps as long as I'm going to make you." And that was the end of that. We must require obedience, even if it makes us late, even if we're inconvenienced. And part of the reason, I think practically speaking, is for the child's own safety. Like when the child or the children, when they're younger, when they're even teenagers or younger adults, they're on the border, maybe they're kind of still living at home, need protection. There's a safety element. Why? Because if you didn't know this, your prefrontal cortex isn't developed, they say, until your mid-20s. And so, as a result, you do all sorts of dumb things when you're younger. I've got this one rental property of mine, and I remember a few years ago, the boys living there, college guys. And I said, "Guys, I know some of you guys might not be here over the summer. Totally understand. You don't want to pay rent over the summer. As long as you get my permission, you find someone to rent out your bedroom over the summer, I'll let that slide. We'll you know." And they said, "Okay, great. So they reach out. They're like, Joe, we found somebody." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, great. Who is it?" And they're like, "It's just a person." And I'm like, "Okay, like a classmate?" "No, not a classmate." And I'm like, "Is it another college student?" "Well, not exactly." And I should have known something was off because they kept just beating around the bush. Like they kept being very cagey to my questions. And I'm like, well, how old is this person? They're like, "Well, they're a little bit older." Finally, I'm like, "Guys, what is going on?" They're like, "Joe, he's 55 and he just got out of prison." I'm like, "No." They're like, "No, but he just got saved." And I'm like, Don't care if he just got saved. Doesn't matter. You found a guy who's 55, just got out of prison. You want him to sublease over the summer? Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm like, "No, man, that dog ain't going to hunt. It just ain't. Like your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. You have not thought through all the different possibilities of what could go wrong in this situation because your brain's just not fully developed. It's not." And that's part of the reason, I guess, why you do all sorts of dumb things when you're 16 and 17 and 18 and 19. Like, hopefully the goal is to eventually stop doing the dumb things by the time you're 25. That's the hope, right? And I still remember one time I was on a date with this girl, not Diana, but she said I could tell the story. I'm 25. The girl, I think, is 21. And we're just taking a walk. Nothing sinister going on here. We're taking a walk, and she's like, "Hey, we should climb up the ladder and go on the roof of Panera." Now, a young Joe Decrion, I probably would have been like, "She's hot. I trust her." But instead, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, I'm like, "Kind of seems like a bad idea. We probably shouldn't do that." And it was like a light bulb moment. I'm like, they said my prefrontal cortex would be developed when I was 25. Thank you, God, right? Like in that moment, I'm like, I don't know why I said that. Like that's not what I normally say. I guess it happened, right? Like you do all sorts of dumb things and foolish things. And so that is one of the reasons this is so important. It's for the safety and your protection because you haven't thought out about all the possibilities that could happen. That's why the obedience to your parents is so critical. And then he says in verse 21, fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Now, obviously, we just did verse 20. He said, children, obey your parents. Now in verse 21, he doesn't say parents. He totally could have. Like, he totally could have included the moms here. He doesn't. But rather, he addresses the fathers. And if you look at a passage like Ephesians 6:1 or 6:4, it follows almost an identical pattern. In other words, there must be a reason why he says mothers and fathers deserve the honor of being obeyed. But when it comes to the responsibility of setting the tone for the whole family, well, that's a little bit different. So that there is no excessive discouragement for the children, that falls on the dads. And I think this is because dads have a very special role as the head, as the representative of the family. Dads play a very, very important role in the family. We already acknowledged this earlier. Like if only your mom is a Christian, your odds of becoming a Christian are 15 to 30%. But if it's only dad, it's 55 to 70% your odds of becoming a Christian. Like God has ordained fathers to play a very important role in the upbringing of their children. In other words, if wives are supposed to submit to the husbands for the leadership role that God has ordained for the family, which he just explained in chapter 3, verse 18, then that means dads bear this special responsibility for the whole family, which is why he addresses dads here in verse 21, and only dads. And he says, be careful that you don't provoke your kids. And the word provoke means to stir to anger. And yet, anger is not what he focuses on. To be clear, he doesn't say, don't provoke them lest they become angry. He says, lest they become discouraged. Which means there is a wrong way to require obedience of children and a right way. And the implication is this: fathers and future fathers in this room, you have to balance the instruction from Colossians 3:20 and 3:21 carefully so that you require obedience of your children, and at the same time, you don't allow your child to manipulate you by pouting because you're worried about the possibility of provoking them. You can't let a child's pouting coerce you so they don't have to obey, and yet at the same time, understand that there is a right way and a wrong way to require obedience. And here are just a few examples of the ways that dads commonly get it wrong. My first example, number one, it's the nagging dad. Some of you guys had the nagging dad. This is where your dad is like, do something, and then you're like, I'm on it, Dad, and then he's just nagging you. Hey, have you done that yet? Dad, it's been like 5 seconds. He's just nagging you all the time. Number two is the demanding dad. This is the dad who was like the drill sergeant. Like the only time he ever communicated with you was just in order to give you instruction. Like this is the dad, like he never really even talked to you. He never asked you questions about what was going on in your life. Just whenever you had communication, he's just giving you orders. That's it, just orders. Number three is the angry dad. Some of you guys had this dad. Dad's always angry all the time. And so what happens is you become discouraged to even talk to him, to even approach him, because you're feeling like you have to walk around on eggshells because, like, I don't know if I'm going to set him off. He's always in a bad mood. If I go talk to him, like, he might just get more angry with me. That's discouraging. It's really discouraging. You can't even talk to your own dad. And number four is the embarrassing dad. This is like, Dad treats me like a 3-year-old even though I'm 9 years old. He treats me like a 9-year-old, but I'm 15 years old. And to make it worse, he'll do this in front of other people. He embarrasses me. And then you got the belittling dad. That's number four. Or the teasing dad. And sometimes it's funny, but more often than not, it crosses the line. And it's like kind of hurtful. And he makes me feel small. And he's trying to tear me down. And it's cloaked in humor, so he justifies it because he's just joking all the time. Don't be that guy. If your dad was like that, don't be that guy. And number five is the impossible dad. This is the dad who says, hey, take the garbage out, be back here in 30 seconds. You're like, Dad, it's going to take me 30 seconds to get my shoes on. Like, this is the dad who has, like, such impossible standards. You're like, Dad, here's my report card. I told you a 5.0. Dad, that's not even possible. A 5 point, like, doesn't matter, right? Like, he gives you these impossible, ridiculous standards. He's like, I can't do that. It's discouraging. It's really discouraging. And number 6 is no gospel dad. This is the dad, he never explains to the child how they can experience the forgiveness of sins. I think this is by far the most tragic example of discouragement, because as Colossians 3:21 says, dads are not to discourage their children. So we think, okay, well, what's the opposite of discouragement? I'm thinking, like, it's encouragement. So that must be what he wants us to do. Like, encouragement means give them hope. Give your children hope. Not in themselves, but because of God. Give them hope that God can use them. Like, be the dad, and moms can do this too, to remind your children about the promises of God, because it's the promises of God that produce real hope. Because ultimately that means that God can take that child with their unique personality and their unique likes and their unique interests, and he can use them for some really, really amazing, God-glorifying things. Don't be that type of dad. Don't be that parent that discourages their children. Oh, that God would help us. Oh, that God would help us not to discourage our children and our future children, but that he would help us encourage them in the hope of the Lord. And so we pray, Lord Jesus, come soon. Come soon, Jesus. But until that time, Lord, help us to live our lives in such a way that we make them count for things of eternal significance. God, help us, Lord, to obey our parents, even when we disagree with them. Help us to honor our parents. That's something we should be doing for the totality of our lives. And I think, if we're being honest, some of us have absolutely failed to honor our parents. We don't know how lucky we are. We don't know how lucky we are to have a mom or a dad. Or some of us who just hit the lottery, we have a mom and a dad who loves you. Help us, God, to honor them. Help us to respect them. And help us, God, to be good parents, both now and in the future, because ultimately it's about pleasing you and serving you and loving you and obeying you. We pray this, Jesus, in your name, amen.